Welcome to What Catholics Believe. I'm your host, Julius Smetona. Today we're going to continue our discussion with Father Donald Sanborn about the state of the Church. Last week, Father Sanborn was explaining that many of the changes led to the decline in vocations because an essentially supernatural task became purely natural. The priest became nothing more than a social worker in a Roman collar. Father Sanborn, welcome back to What Catholics Believe. Father, you were explaining that the effect that the changes of the Second Vatican Council had on the priesthood. What about the lack of the unrest, the dissidence of the faithful? And moreover, what about the behavior of the laity in general and in the world as large, the tremendous moral decline? Do you attribute any of this to the Vatican Council?
I attribute all of it to the Vatican Council. When you replace the teaching authority of the Catholic Church, which is the teaching authority of God, with the primacy of the human conscience, the result of that is moral chaos, moral disintegration. It used to be that the Catholic Church was the bulwark of morality, not only for its own people, but for the whole world, even people who didn't believe in it. It was the mainstay of morality. A perfect example of that is movies that you remember, perhaps you don't, the Legion of Decency, where even, for example, in 1939, Gone with the Wind was listed as a B picture, morally objectionable in part for all, because of the lifestyle of the main players, even in the film, and the use of a bad word in the film. The Catholic Church was a stopper to any kind of lowering of the standards. Many films in the 1960s came under the disapproval of the Catholic Church before the Council, and even shortly after the Council, when those norms were still more or less in effect. But now, even PG is something that is absolutely unacceptable in most cases to a person who cultivates purity. That's one example. Birth control. If freedom of conscience is the norm, if you have freedom of conscience, understood in the way I explained it, well then, what church, what priest can say to you that you cannot use birth control? And even if they produce some sort of norm, like Paul VI, Humanae Vitae, they do not enforce it with the authority of God revealing. It's simply a norm.
But you know, this thing of enforcement is always blamed on rebellious bishops and rebellious priests. It never goes back to the hierarchy itself. It says, look, he keeps telling them to do this, and they simply ignore it.
No, it is rooted in the Vatican Council, and it is rooted in the key doctrine of that council and of the key doctrine of the whole new religion, freedom of conscience. And that is the reason for the alteration of every aspect of the Catholic Church. You mentioned the fact that there are many dissidents among theologians and lay people. For example, 81% of the people of the Archdiocese of New York think that birth control is perfectly okay. I mean, that is due again to this same doctrine. Years ago, in the 1930s, you would be outside the Catholic Church if you disagreed with that. You would be an outcast, even in society. I remember that Governor Rockefeller of New York had a hard time making the people swallow the idea of his being divorced and remarried. That this was a scandal in a state that was not mostly Catholic. It's mostly non-Catholic. But it was a scandal, even in the 1960s.
Well, I can even say that in the 30s and 20s, from biographies I've read of individuals who were very prominent in one aspect or another, that divorce would ruin a public career.
Yes.
Now, but here's what I'm a little disturbed about, Father. You are saying, we see very clearly that John Paul II comes to the United States, repeats these teachings of Humanae Vitae, of Paul VI. He disciplines people like Father Curran, and it's clear that there is an effort being made to enforce this, and yet you are saying no, that this is part and parcel of the whole Second Vatican Council. Are you saying that they're just pretending to enforce it, but they don't want to enforce it? What exactly is the cause of?
No, they are following the role of authority assigned to them by the modernist position. Modernism was a heresy that became strong around the turn of the century and which was condemned by St. Pius X. And it is a religion based on freedom of conscience. It is a religion in which all of the tenets, all of the dogmas and morals of the religion come ultimately from the human subconscious. And each one believes the way he wants to. Yet there is a certain solidarity of a particular religion. This is what the present new church hierarchy is talking about. They will come and express the norms, the dogmas, the standardized morals, but in the practical order they are not preached as having come from God. They are not preached with the authority of God and binding on the conscience. A perfect example is what John Paul II said in California, that anyone who disagrees with the teaching of the Catholic Church cannot be considered a good Catholic. And that's almost an exact quote.
Well, it sounds true. He's not a good Catholic if he disagrees with the Church.
If he disagrees with the Catholic Church's teaching, he is not a Catholic. And there is a world of difference between being a good Catholic and not being a Catholic. Your ticket to the Catholic faith is your profession of the Catholic Church's teaching. And should you fail to profess the Catholic faith and the Church's teaching, you cease to be a Catholic. His predecessors before the Council would have said, if anyone disagrees with the teaching of the Catholic Church, they cease to be Catholics. That's what canon law said, the traditional canon law. But now they are simply saying, you're not a good Catholic. You still belong to the organization, but you're not a good member of it.
Father, there's probably many in our audience have even had the same experience where if they are in a serious moral state and they're very concerned about it, then it might be said to them, look, go to Father so-and-so, I'm sure he'll give you absolution. And then Father so-and-so might say, if it's a problem, say with birth control, look, go ahead and use it. In some instances it's all right. I'm sure the Church will change soon in her teaching on this. Then we have these examples of Ted Kennedy of saying that he or Mrs. Ferraro, when she ran for vice president, that they may personally be opposed to a certain abuse, moral abuse, say abortion, but publicly they couldn't do anything about it. And we have silence from the bishops. So what I would say to attack those who say the popes and bishops are doing everything they can, why is there silence? Why don't the bishops say anything about these abuses? Why doesn't John Paul II say anything about this? And the other question I would ask, has there, before the Second Vatican Council, when politicians behaved in such a manner or priests behaved in such a manner, was there public disciplining?
Oh, if you publicly professed any doctrine condemned by the Catholic Church, you would be warned formally by the Vatican, and you would be ultimately excommunicated if you did not recant. And there are many cases of that that could be cited. Now you can say almost anything. Like you can say that even perversions are okay. And the only thing that the Vatican will do is take away maybe your representation of the Vatican, like Father Curran or Hans Kung, where they cannot have the stamp of approval at their school that they are representing the Vatican. But they are still Catholics, according to the Vatican. They are not taken out of the communion of the Catholic Church. And even though some of them say that sexual perversions are permitted, that abortion is permitted under certain circumstances, even though you have nuns, so-called nuns, saying that abortions are permitted under certain circumstances, that these people continue to have the Catholic name. And that is the bottom line, if I could say that, concerning the state of the Catholic Church, that you have hundreds of millions of people walking around denying truths of the Catholic faith and still at the same time bearing the Catholic name.
Father, what is your situation? You are a priest who follows the traditions. You refuse the liturgical reforms mandated by the Second Vatican Council. How does the hierarchy regard you? Are you considered in good standing? Are you under suspension? What is your status?
I have never received any censure from any member of the New Church hierarchy. However, I know that they would seriously disagree with just about everything that I stand for, just as I disagree with virtually everything that they stand for. We belong to two different religions.
Would they consider you a Catholic in good standing? Would they be in communion? Would they consider themselves to be in communion with you, to be part of the same church?
Probably not, because we disagree on the fundamental doctrine. They consider themselves to be in communion with Protestants. John Paul II told a bunch of Baptists in Australia that he was in communion with them. I saw it in the Osservatore Romano. He told a number of Anglican bishops just a few weeks ago that he was in communion with them. But they do not consider themselves in communion with us because we deny their fundamental doctrine of Vatican II, which is freedom of conscience, and its natural child, which is freedom of religion. That is the key doctrine. If you are ecumenical, you go along with it. And their religion is not the Catholic religion, it's the ecumenical religion. They all agree that there is no one set standard doctrine of religion. They all agree. That's the first thing. They all agree that there is no objectivity concerning the faith, and that the human conscience is the primary dictator of what should be believed, what should be done, and not the authority of God revealing.
So, Father, you've answered the question on how the hierarchy looks at you. Earlier in the last program, and even today, you made some remarks which I thought were very disturbing. You said that it is impossible for the Catholic Church to contradict itself. And you mentioned that in the past, even, there were false councils, and which were declared such because of either contradiction or teaching error. You seem to say the same thing with regard to the Second Vatican Council. And then you even say that you would disagree fundamentally with everyone with the hierarchy. How do you regard the Second Vatican Council? Do you consider it to be a false council?
Yes, because I'm a Catholic, because I believe in the teaching of the Catholic Church. When the Pope points out something from Revelation to be true by his apostolic authority, that is irreformable in itself. because he is exercising, ultimately, the power of the Holy Ghost. It is the Holy Ghost through him pointing out the truth. And so if Pius IX has told us that this doctrine is an insanity, then I believe with the Catholic faith that it is an insanity. And if any body of men should come along, or I should even perhaps cite the quotation of St. Paul, even if an angel from heaven should come and preach to me a different gospel, that is a different truth, a truth that, or a statement that contradicts the truth that is given to us, then let him or let it be anathema. That is, we must reject it. And that contradiction on the part of Vatican II of the teaching of the Catholic Church is a sure sign that the Holy Ghost was not there and that the hierarchy there had defected from the Catholic faith.
So what is your view of the present hierarchy of a Cardinal Ratzinger, of a Cardinal Audi, of a Pope John Paul II? How do you view them? Do you view them as being Catholic?
I see any members of the present New Church hierarchy who thoroughly or who uphold this false teaching, who agree with it, who externally go along with it, who give signs of agreement with it, because there's a distinction to be made there. I consider them to have defected from the Catholic faith. And if they still inhabit Catholic offices, buildings that are Catholic, and if they still externally carry on the functions of Catholic institutions, they do so only in appearance. They are not true officers of the Catholic Church.
Father, what you were saying in a refined manner is truly earth-shaking. You're saying then that these people are not cardinals, they're not popes, they're outside of the Church. They've defected from the faith. How did this come about then? That's the deeper question. How did Vatican II come about? How did we reach this state of affairs?
Yes, I am saying that, that they have only in appearance the offices that they claim to have. In fact, they don't, because, again, your ticket to the Catholic Church is the profession of the Catholic faith. And lacking the Catholic faith, you cannot be a member of the Catholic Church, and by ever greater reason, you cannot be an officer of the Catholic Church. That just stands to common sense.
Right.
Now, how this all happened is another very big question.
How did the Church go from apparent health when conversions were reaching high numbers, when in fact in the 50s they believed that the United States was going to be a Catholic country by the year 2000? How did we go from that state to where we are today and the chaos that followed the Vatican Council? What brought this about?
I think it is because the popes, Benedict XV, Pius XI, and Pius XII, did not put into effect the measures against modernism that Pius X wanted. One of the first acts of Benedict XV in 1914 was to issue an encyclical in which he said, in certain veiled language, but it was nonetheless clear, that he would let up on the suppression of modernism.
Perhaps you could tell us what is modernism, and how was it suppressed and attacked by Pius X? Perhaps we should clarify that first.
Modernism is that, as I explained before, that heresy which sees the source of all religious dogma and morals as the human subconscious. It identifies God with the human subconscious. It has strains of pantheism.
Right.
Okay. And it was deemed by St. Pius X to be the synthesis of all heresies, the meeting place of all heresies, and he said it is worse than the error of Luther, the worst assault on the Catholic Church. His language is very strong in the encyclical that condemned it. And his pontificate was characterized principally by his fight against modernism.
Didn't he once say that when someone said that he's too hard on the modernists, that he said no, rather they should be beaten with fists?
Yes, he responded that to the Archbishop of Cremona, for there were a number of bishops who were writing to him complaining of his stern measures against modernism.
What were these stern measures?
He encouraged a vigilance in every diocese against the modernists. If you knew someone to be modernist in your seminary or in your parish, you were to denounce them to the authorities, even to Rome.
Well, this sounds almost like the Inquisition brought into the 20th century.
Yes, it was, in the sense that Pius X wanted to track down the modernists in the church, because he said that the greatest danger is the fact that they have infiltrated. They are not outside the walls, they're inside the walls. And so his reign was characterized by that more than by anything else. He is often known for the communion of children, for canon law, other great accomplishments of his reign. But what he is remembered for by those who lived through his reign is his suppression of modernism. And there was among, shall we say, a softer line in the hierarchy, a reaction to that. And they were looking in 1914 at the conclave for someone who would let up on that suppression. And they found it in Cardinal della Chiesa, Benedict XV. And never did we see the same prosecution of this heresy as we did under St. Pius X. So from 1914 to 1950, rather the 1958, you had a whole generation of clergy, if we could put it that way, even 2 generations, it's about 40 years, in an atmosphere in which there was a heresy within the walls of the church. There was like an infectious heresy. Mm-hmm. And if they were infected by it, they were able to rise to high levels in the hierarchy and then infect whole masses of clergy and people. Until in 1958, one of them was elected the Pope, and that's John the 23rd. His career was loaded with the infection of modernism. Everywhere in his career you see a modernist influence. His assistant priest at his first Mass, I think it was in 1903, was a man who died excommunicated by Pius XI in 1943 as a modernist. And he was a personal friend of the young Roncalli in 1903. And Roncalli himself was called before Cardinal Delay in 1914 for suspicion of modernism. He had to go to Rome and answer to Cardinal
what
Delay.
extent can a modernist be a Catholic?
Modernism and Catholicism are so utterly opposed. They are more opposed than even Arianism and Catholicism. For the fact that Catholicism is based on the idea of the authority of God revealing, modernism is based on the idea of the authority of the human conscience. Those two things are utterly, intrinsically opposed. It is impossible for a modernist to be a Catholic.
Juridically, is he automatically, is that cause for excommunication, the profession of modernism?
If he publicly professes modernism, yes, he is automatically outside of the communion of the Catholic Church. Automatically, because of the condemnation of Pius X.
And yet these were the people who infiltrated the Catholic Church, as you put it, and who brought about the Second Vatican Council.
Yes.
What percentage, in closing, of the Council Fathers were of modernist tendency in 1962? You have any idea?
It's like trying to find out how far the AIDS infection has progressed in someone. Some were not modernist at all, some were slightly infected, some were completely infected. And there were, I would say, a good 25% that were completely infected with modernism. Principally the German and French bishops and some Italians.
Father, unfortunately, we've run out of time.